You're looking for a segment alternative? Stay with me for the next 10 minutes and we go through all the different kind of alternatives that are pretty close to segment. And we will talk about the benefits, what changes, where maybe segment has still an edge, so that you can make a decision about it. Let's go. Okay, so first of all, let's start. Okay, for some reasons you clicked on this video, so you're looking for a segment alternative. So it could be that you at the moment are looking into segment as a tool itself, and you just want to check, are there other alternatives? So you're starting at the buying process, or you are using segment and for some reasons you are not really happy. Please let me know in the comments which kind of things don't really work out for you with segment, because I would really love to learn and give you some feedback on that. Because there's one thing you always have to keep in mind. The tool automatically doesn't really remove any kind of issues that you have. Often it's the implementation, it's the kind of design, it's the kind of how you use it. Maybe you don't really use enough things of it, and so most of the time when I talk to people, they tell me, okay, the reasons why we don't like segment, it's too expensive. It's a great tool, we really love it, it works really well, but we pay too much money of it. And so then, for example, it could be like an approach to look how you can make more use of it. So I mean, maybe it's just underserved. So maybe you don't really see the different kind of things that you can do with it. Okay, where you can create more value for the money. Because one thing you have to keep in mind: everything that we will look at today will cost some money. So it's not like that you go away from one tool to another and you save money. Okay, but let's get started. First alternative, naturally, Rudderstack. Rudderstack was built as an open source alternative to segment, and because of that it was built in the beginning pretty close to segment, and I would say it is still pretty close to segment until today. So they both have a lot of similar principles, but the good thing is Rudderstack is out there and they are putting a lot of effort into product development and bringing new things out. So I definitely call them the challenger, because they definitely challenge segment in their core kind of features, and they are trying to push new stuff in there, and segment has to follow up. And so, which is always really good for any kind of product. As said, so Rudderstack started out as an alternative, open source alternative. They then introduced their managed service, and today it's really the kind of setup that their managed service, I would say, is the dominant offering. So you can still use the open source version, you can still hold it on your own system, but this is kind of the core setup that you get. So you don't really get all the interesting new stuff that Rudderstack has built on top. So let's go into it. So what are the differences and what is the same? So we look into the core features. I have No, not true. I have 5 core features. So let's start. Event collection. Of course, this is super important. You want to collect the events from different kind of places and want to bring them in one place. So the important part here is okay, what kind of SDKs, what kind of trackers do you get? Here, both are pretty similar. I didn't really compare them side by side, so it might be that maybe segment has 1 or 2 more and Rudderstack has 1 or 2 different ones, but in general, they both have, I think, over 15 SDKs that you can use to track the data from front ends, from back ends, from games, for whatever. So second one, event collection from a cloud source. So this is a little bit different to, let's say, where you track the data directly in all the different kind of websites that you have, but you also have the possibility to source your events from other applications. And so you usually do this by using their webhook functionality. And both tools have implemented automatic webhook, let's say, endpoints that you can set up, and then you can receive real-time events from Intercom or all the different kind of tools, HubSpot and so on. So, and here both are pretty much matching as well. So again, it might be that you have a specific kind of source that one is supporting, the other one is not supporting. So always check out which kind of sources you need and then see, okay, who's supporting it. But let's say in a total, both are pretty close to each other. Another feature, batch loading. So this is slightly different to the one that I just described. So the event collection via webhooks is something which happens in real time. So you receive whenever an event happens in these tools, you receive it immediately and can process it. Batch loading is differently. So batch loading is usually you load a whole chunk of data from a specific kind of tool like Stripe, so once a day, for example, and you sync it down to a data warehouse. And this is something you can do through segment. Early on, it was always there, and you can also do through Rudderstack. And here again, so check the sources. So let's say in a total, I think they support basically the same kind of sources. There might be one or two, or maybe even some more, which the one is supporting, the other one not. In the end, like check what kind of data you need to load, and then check how both are doing it. And both do it pretty solidly. So I use both for loading data, so it works fine. Then the destinations. I mean, both tools work like this. So on the one hand, you collect the data, then you can do stuff. We talk about this in a second, and then you can send it out to different kind of tools to use them there. And so this makes it really nice because you have to track it once, but can spread it across different kind of tools. So in the end, also like both support a lot. I don't know, Segment has 190 or so. So and Rudderstack I think doesn't have a lot less. So both support plenty of destinations. Again, like check out which kind of tool you are working before you make a switch or you make a decision. So this is really the essential part. If you compare both of them, really see which kind of tool we are working right now. Are there some tools we are planning to work with? And then check the sources, check the destinations to really see who is supporting it out of the box. In both are ways to build the things to some degree yourself. So, I mean, there are possibilities, and we get to this in just a second. But of course, like it's work. So we really have to involve someone with development skills and so on. So when it comes out of the box, it's definitely the better solution. Last core feature, transformation. So in Segment, it's called functions. In Segment, it was not there from the first time, so it was introduced later, but it's a really powerful feature. And for me, like it's a core feature. So what you can do, like in Segment, you have two places where you can build a custom function. So one, before the event data basically enters the whole Segment pipeline, stream, and so on. So this is something you can use to filter out events, to filter out some properties, to mask some properties if you have personal information, to change event data before it basically gets processed and sent out to other places. And then you have another point where you can create a function. This is basically a destination function. There, for example, you can write your own destination. So if you want to send the data to a different kind of place and it's not really kind of supported, then you can write something there that gets all the event data, maybe filters through. So you can create a filter here as well, and then send it out. So these are two ways. In Rudderstack, you just have transformations, and so like the transformation are mostly like used for the first part, like where before the event data enters in. So with the same functionality, so you can filter, you can do whatever. So Rudderstack, I know that you can do JavaScript and Python scripts to do this whole stuff, and I think Segment has the same kind of support. JavaScript definitely, and I think they also have Python. So, but bear with me. So I think I never did really like a Python thing there, but you can easily check it out. So it's really like you write code in both cases. And so in Rudderstack, you also have the possibility to write a transformation to prep the data in a specific kind of way. And then, for example, you can use a webhook destination to then use this data and send it out with this specific kind of webhook. But they don't have these two explicit different kind of functions. So in general, as you can see, Rudderstack is basically, Rudderstack and Segment cover the core features quite similarly. And in the end, it's like the details where you really have to check similar sources supported, similar destinations supported. So, but in the end, you can really compare both, and both are quite similar. So, what is different? I mean, on one hand, Segment has been acquired by Twilio, and therefore it's starting to get integrated more and more with Twilio Engage. I always thought it would happen even more than it happened to now, but there's already now Twilio Engage. And Twilio Engage is basically like, so you can use the Twilio platform to use the Segment data to build custom flows, custom pipelines, how you want to run your messaging, how you want to run specific kind of campaigns. And so, of course, like it's a close connection. Both are starting to merge more stuff together. So you basically get the activation layer out of the box, but it's still like in a different tool, still with Twilio. And of course, like also like a different kind of price point that you have to consider. In general, I would say like Rudderstack. So let's say with the core stuff, so both, for example, have just introduced customer profile or basically identity resolution built in. So this is something both came out, let's say, not so far away from each other. My impression is like that Rudderstack is moving a little bit faster. I mean, they are the challenger, of course, like they have to challenge, they have to come up with new stuff out there. So if you are into like, okay, you want more features and more stuff, you want to really make sure that you get the new stuff, then maybe Rudderstack can really make a difference here. Finally, pricing. So this is definitely different. And this is, I think, the major reason which I see people pick either Segment or Rudderstack, because it depends a little bit on your setup. So Segment's pricing always was based on monthly tracked users. Which means like let's say the one user ID that you send in is basically considered for the pricing, and then they don't really care how many events you track for this kind of user. So if you have a scenario where you don't really have such a huge user base, so classic B2B software as a service, but you want to just go crazy with the kind of events, if this is a good idea, something else. But then, for example, Segment can be quite attractive for you. So in Segment, you get 1,000 MTUs for free in their free plan. And then you basically, the next plan, I think you pay, I haven't checked the total numbers, but let's say around 100, 200 for 10K MTUs, but you can check it out. So you can go on their website. But important is to know it's based on monthly tracked users. Rudderstack in difference is based on the number of events that you send into. So like in their free account, so you get a lot. So in free, you get 1 million events for free. This is quite a lot. So you can run a lot with this kind of stuff. And so here you have to consider, so it might be a use case, for example, you don't track too many events per users. Or for example, you get a lot of users, maybe you're really good in acquisition, you get a lot of users on your website, but not so many then go really into your application where a lot of events happening. Then, for example, Rudderstack can be really attractive because like the ones that creates the volume usually have 1 or 2 events. And then the other ones, like where you have smaller MTUs, are creating more events. So it's definitely something to check out. If you already have some numbers about your event volume, about your user volume, you can easily check what's better. For the setup, so Segment always comes as managed. This was always like this. So you go there, they do everything for you. They do everything. All the data infrastructure is there just by creating the account. Rudderstack, you have the 2 options. So you can either go with the open source variant and can set it up yourself. It's not too complicated, but it's also not something that if you never really set up infrastructure yourself, not something that you can do easily in an afternoon. So if you have a team that is comfortable managing and let's say event pipeline stacks, it's definitely a possibility that you can go. But Rudderstack makes a really like a clear difference here. Like the open source product is like a core thing, so it really has core functionality. But if you want to go beyond and do really like more stuff, then you need to go on the managed service. So the managed service, as I said, it's same like Segment as well. So they take care of everything, all the setup and so on. So, as said, so Segment and Rudderstack are pretty close. You can look at the pricing, which works better for you. You can look at the different sources, destination, which works better for you. They also like let's say the tracking semantics and so on are pretty close to each other as well. So if you know how to do stuff in Segment, you usually know how to do it in Rudderstack as well. Okay, moving to the next one, Snowplow. So let's call it the engineering or data ownership solution. So Snowplow is definitely slightly different than Segment. We will see this in a second why it is. So the major difference is like Snowplow always started as a, let's say, event collection pipeline or behavioral data pipeline, or however they call it differently across the kind of journey. So it was always like they were always strong in this part where you can collect the events and then put it into a data warehouse. So they have a very strong open source offering. Was like Snowplow was pretty long open source from the beginning, and then they added more managed service, and we get to the managed service later. And I would still say like the biggest stake and the biggest difference that Snowplow has is like the privacy and data ownership thing. So in the end, like even like you can have a managed version which basically runs in your cloud infrastructure. So just Snowplow manages the whole setup for you, but still like the stuff is in your environment, and so it doesn't really leave it. And so I think this is makes like the big big difference on that. Let's have a look at the core features. So core features, event collection. When it comes to tracking events, I would say Snowplow has most of the trackers or SDKs out there. I haven't counted them, but I guess there are one or two more than Segment is offering. And I still say, okay, like the quality is really top notch. So since the trackers are open source, I often sometimes use them in other kind of projects where we have our own event pipeline, but we still use the Snowplow SDKs because they're super solid. They are maintained, they are developed, and so on. So it's I would say this is really strong because like this is Snowplow's strongest asset to get the data somewhere and then get them in the data warehouse. Event collection from other cloud sources via webhooks. It has been introduced. It's definitely there. They have some sources, but it's definitely less than Segment is offering out of the box. So you really need to check and you really need to check. So for example, I'm not sure, for example, if it's already provided in an open source version. So it's definitely there in the cloud versions. But go into the documentation, check which kind of, let's say, sources they are supporting. And I mean, in the end, like since Snowplow is pretty open up for open source, you can always create this yourself. So you can have an endpoint that can receive a webhook, and then you can apply the schema. So you have the schema ready, and then you just send it into Snowplow directly. So I built this kind of setup before. So the only thing that you have to take care of, you have to know how the data looks like when it arrives via the webhook. You create a custom schema for that, and then you just pipe it directly into the Snowplow pipeline. So it works really well. So we did implementations with Shopify, for example, that working really well. Batch loading, so no batch loading. And this is not something that Snowplow is providing because it was never really some of their area. So usually you use a different tool, like, I don't know, 5-Trend-Stitch, Airbyte, whatever, Kibula, whatever you like to load the data. Sending out to destinations, also not something that was kind of really built in. So Snowplow released Snowbridge, another open source project, I think last year in August. And this basically has the possibility to sit at the end of their real-time data pipelines and then send the data out to specific kind of destinations. But there are some destinations prepared, mostly like, let's say, more platform destinations like AWS Kinesis and so on. Not really like a lot of marketing destinations. So, but you can build them yourself. So you can do this. This is one way. And the other way is like, I mean, what you can do is like, not all the data has to immediately arrive in a different tool as well. So most of the time, the setup that we build is like, so we use Snowplow to get the data in a data warehouse, run some transformation modeling with SQL on top, and then use tool like Census to basically load these data back into marketing tools. So this works, I would say, 95% of all cases, because like it's not really so many cases where you immediately need to get the data through, and you can build some, let's say, some security checks, some really good and important transformation in there, and so it can be really good setup. But you definitely need to combine different kind of tools. Transformations. So there's some transformation built in the pipeline. These are called enrichers, and they are, let's say, a lot of enrichments coming out of the box. As far as I know for the open source one, and I don't know about the managed ones, that you can also create custom enrichments and then apply them there. So, but these enricher, for example, like on the one hand, they load, so they do what they tell, like they enrich the data. So for example, they take an IP address and then get some geo information for that. Or you can also use it for filtering down stuff. So there's like an enrichment where you can filter down IP addresses, where you can tokenize PII data. And so there's different way. The most of the transformation, as I just said, usually happens afterwards. So the data lands in a data warehouse, and then you put, I don't know, whatever kind of SQL models on top to transform the data or how you want to use it. So it's usually like a step afterwards. And Snowplow has plenty of dbt packages around. So if you work with dbt, this can give you a really good kickstart. So they have really good packages, for example, to take the atomic event data from a website and then apply session and then apply proper page views on top of that. So it's definitely worth to check out what Snowplow has prepared, because they are investing a lot into this to provide dbt packages to make the stuff easier. So what makes it different? I think the major difference is really like Snowplow works with an enforced schema. In the end, Segment works with let's say an optional schema. So of course, like you can apply a tracking plan and you can check if there are issues and so on. You can fix the issues. I think maybe they even have the option that you can also enforce it, but it's really like not the default. So in Snowplow, it's always the default. You always have to provide the schema that you are expecting the events to arrive. And based on the schema, Snowplow makes a decision where it puts the events. So if the events match the schema, puts it on the normal pipeline, goes into your data warehouse, everything is fine. If it doesn't really match up, it puts it on a bad pipeline, and then you can decide what you do. So for example, you can then clean up the events and make them match the schema and then load them in your data warehouse, or you can just discard them or whatever, you can analyze them. This is really nice. So if you really want, this is like the major difference. You have full control about how the data is flowing, and so you can really make decisions. But in the end, you have to make decisions. Let's say in the BDP, behavioral data platform, and I think in the big version, they have things to help you with that, how you handle the bad pipelines, and so then it makes it easier for you to make a decision. But for example, if you run an open source pipeline, you have to have a process how you handle and how you work with the bad kind of data. Finally, setup and pricing. So again, like we know the segment one and based on MTUs. So Snowplow, of course, like open source, you run on your infra, you have to pay your infra. In the other kind of way, so Snowplow has launched the new cloud one just months ago. And so cloud is basically like the middle tier that they have. And so cloud is managed for you. So it's basically similar to segment. So they take care of everything to land the data where you want it. So it starts at $800 a month. And for that, you get 80 million events. So this is already a pretty solid one. So what is a little bit missing is like an entry level. So where you're just starting out. So they don't really have a free plan. They have a trial where you can try it out. And so the free plan for them is basically the open source version. So as said, segment is managed in Snowplow. You can either use it with open source and then self-hosted and to really take care of it, or you can use it in the two managed versions. So like as I said, the new cloud version, which is managing everything on your end, or you can basically go for the behavioral data platform where Snowplow is managing the whole infrastructure in your infrastructure. So if you, in your AWS account or in your Google Cloud account, so they basically set everything up, maintain it, and make sure that everything scales and so on, which is super interesting if you really have data that you don't really want to have on different kind of systems. All right, next one. Jitsu, I call it the mystery. And this one is a quick one because it's really kind of a mystery and an interesting thing, but I still want to include because I kind of liked them when they came out. So I like the initial version. So I think there was a version 1, 2 or 3 years ago. I tested it, I really liked it because it was very simple, it was really straightforward, very minimalistic approach to the whole thing. But it was then quite stale for a long time. So not really a lot of updates were happening. And I was already thought, okay, it's really discontinued. But now, so today is Friday the 4th of August. Yesterday, they launched or basically announced the version 2, which is called Jitsu Next, which is quite exciting because they pulled some of the stuff that they did before, did a whole, basically full rewrite of everything, and they are now ready to go to something new. And I'm really want to see, but put it like this. For me, it's not an alternative yet because it's still too new. You don't really know where to go, but I still want to put it in here so that you can keep it in the back of your head, check what they're doing. So let's see. Okay, event collection, they don't really have a lot of trackers yet. So mostly, I guess they hope that people will use the HTTP endpoint to inject events, which let's say from backend processes is really not a big problem. But let's say if you really go to the front end, then an SDK makes sense because you have to have more stuff taken care of. So let's see where they go. They have some website trackers, but I think they don't have mobile trackers. So can you get data from cloud service via webhooks? So not out of the box, it's not there yet. But of course, you can build yourselves. You can build, some kind of endpoint that can receive webhooks, and then you basically just push them down via HTTP into Jitsu. So I did this before, it works quite well, but of course, it's work on your end. Batch loading, they had batch loading in the version 1. I think they were using Airbyte. Not totally sure about that. They don't have it anymore, which I think makes sense. So I never really understood this batch loading part in Segment and Rudderstack as well. And Jitsu doesn't have it. I think it's not a big miss. Destinations, mostly warehouses at the moment. So it's really mostly like an event collection pipeline that you then use in a warehouse. They have some other ones you can pass it on to GA as far as I can see. But it's not really extensive, definitely not comparable to the kind of destination that Segment has. Transformation transformation, they have functions. So right now for JavaScript, and they do the same thing as the transformations and functions in Segment and Rudderstack. So you can write JS code that can basically filter down, modify, change kind of data, filter out data, and so on. So it does the same kind of job, and you can also write a function that just sends the data to your custom kind of destination. So what is different? First of all, as I said, it's super new. We don't really know where it's going. I always liked the kind of simple approach they had, and this is also like which brings me that I will test it out again. They give you a ClickHouse instance as well if you sign up, so you already have an endpoint that you don't really have to create, which can be interesting for testing out, but in the end you might have your own warehouse where you want to get the data to. So pricing is interesting. I mean, they're starting out, so we have to see where it goes. So you get 200k events for free, which is not so much, but the interesting thing is what they do is like they make a distinction between captured event and active events. So with the functions, you can basically decide which kind of events you actually really want to use. So I have several setups where we basically always had the trouble that we had some events that came automatically, could be important, but really don't know. So usually then you basically stop tracking them, and they really make it okay, you can capture it, but you can make a decision, really like a planned decision, which kind of events you want to use. And only these events that are then going through the, let's say, through the function and into the full pipeline, these are the ones you get charged on. So you have some possibilities to handle this, which is interesting. I mean, we have to see how big the impact is, really like in real life use cases, but yeah, let's see. So you also have, I mean, Jitsu was open source when they started out. Now they still have an open source part, so I think the pipeline you can still set up yourself, but they also have a managed version, and then so like as said, so it's pretty straightforward to work with the managed version. I haven't tested the open source version yet. The old one was pretty straightforward to deploy, so this was something I did in the afternoon. I have to see how the new one looks like. Okay, so as I said, something for the back of the head, not really like something to consider as an alternative yet, but maybe they grow into this. As I said, I really like their work, I really like their approaches. Okay, finally, something that maybe sometimes people still don't really have, let's say in this kind of equation, but it totally makes sense. So Amplitude, I called it like kind of the side gig, because in the end, like Amplitude is an analyst tool or an analytics tool first. And they added CDP functionality, I think 1 year ago. It always differs when they announce it and when it becomes general available, but it's available now, so you can use it. But like the interesting thing is like with Amplitude, like it's still, I mean, like the core thing, the first class citizen is still like it's an analytics tool. And then afterwards, it's a CDP, which can bring some interesting things in there. So let's look at the core features. Event collection. Amplitude also comes around with plenty of trackers. I'm not really sure if they have as many as Segment, but at least close to. Simple, because like Amplitude was always built that you can use it from all the different kind of platforms. So this comes really close, and it's solid. I mean, Amplitude is doing this for years, so their SDKs are really good and really working well. If you want to collect the data from different kind of tools via webhooks, so Amplitude has this as well. So I wouldn't say they come, let's say, close to the kind of sources that Segment has, but they're growing. So it's really growing up. They're really adding new stuff, and you already have plenty of, let's say, really like the usual marketing platforms that you can already hook in and get into Amplitude automatically. Batch loading, they have something where you can basically connect your data warehouse to Amplitude and use this as a source to source up specific kind of events that you, for example, load from a different kind of thing. So it's a different kind of process, but in the end, you can achieve the same thing. So, but for example, they have some kind of, let's say, batch loading, for example, from the marketing platforms like Google Ads and Facebook. Destinations. So again, this is the interesting thing. I mean, you can work with your data and then you send the data out to the destinations. And they don't have the, let's say, the high number of destinations as Segment and Rudderstack have, but they have already plenty of them. And so they are growing. And so it's definitely, again, you have to check which kind of tools you work with and then you just check if Amplitude is supporting it or not. Transformations, definitely, I think this is like the major difference. So Amplitude has some transformation possibilities in there. So you can merge events, you can rename events, you can can hide event and properties, or like you can rename and merge properties. But it's not like that you can write a function and do stuff. So it's more like you can really do it inside the tool. So you don't have so much power, but then it's more accessible for, let's say, people who cannot write JavaScript code. So we have to see. So put it like this. I sometimes really have use cases where we need the code. Sometimes, often enough, we have use cases where we don't really need it. So what's the big difference? First of all, of course, like it's quite new. So the CDP functionality is not around so long and it's growing. So we really have to see which parts are coming to this. And so the interesting thing is like, so for example, one part which is really like native to Amplitude is like segmentation. I mean, this is what you do in a product analytics tool. You segment like hell. So you create this kind of cohort of people. So you create this kind of segmentation of people, this kind of audience. And so this makes it interesting because you now can basically use the stuff that you identified in your analysis and you just push it down to marketing tools where you can work actively with this kind of data. And the other ones also now basically have this as well. So you can now create this kind of segmentations in Segment as well. But it's kind of, let's say, the second-class citizen. So it's like for Segment, like event collection is like the core thing, and I would say like for Amplitude, more like the analysis is the core thing, and then the rest comes later. So we'll still like I would say like, I mean, Amplitude building these kind of cohorts and segments is really straightforward. I mean, they worked on this for over 10 years, so they know how to do it. So I would say this is really interesting if you really work a lot already with analyzing stuff and then use just the stuff that you already have for your activation. Setup and pricing. Amplitude has a very extensive MTU pricing. So Amplitude switched to MTU, I think, last year. And so there you get 100,000 MTUs for free. And you can already also like use the CDP capabilities. I'm not sure of everything. This is sometimes always a little bit confusing about Amplitude to really know what you really can get, because like Amplitude is definitely not unlocking all the features in the different kind of plans. So definitely you need to check it out, but you have a very extensive one where you can already try out things. Again, like Amplitude is managed, so there's no open source version and so on. So you sign up, you do your stuff and you try it out. So it's pretty easy to try it out. And so it's quite interesting. So it's not a classic CDP. And this brings us to my last part. CDP. I mean, Segment calls it, everyone calls themselves CDP. I'm just waiting until Excel call themselves a CDP, because you can have email addresses in there. Everyone is in a CDP, so it's really hard to basically compare this stuff. So something which we should definitely put on a list is mParticle. I never really worked with mParticle, and this is the reason why I didn't put it in this kind of list, because I usually just like to recommend alternatives that I really know. But mParticle is definitely from the outside bringing a lot of stuff that Segment is bringing with them, and so it's definitely worth to check them out. I still have it on my list to test it, because like they changed their pricing. I also like they're opening up a little bit more for smaller use cases, and so I might check it out in the future. Then there's something like Census. So I mentioned Census already in let's say when we talked about Snowplow. So Census doesn't have this event collection part, and this is the reason why I don't put them in there. But for example, if you have some, let's say, proper event collection pipelines, or maybe you use your internal ones, you just get the stuff from your database, you get it from your streams, whatever, and then you just need the part that you want to push the data into a specific kind of marketing, sales, or whatever kind of destination, then Census is interesting, because Census is now adding more tools around building audiences, building segments, do some identity resolution and so on, so to make this stuff easier. And then once you have built this, send it out to the different kind of marketing platforms. So Census is more like living on the other end, but still, I mean, it's not so far away, so it's definitely something to consider. And there are other tools around there who do similar kind of stuff. As said, like this category is crazy. So in theory, you have 200 alternatives, but I focus on the core one, and I hope this helps you a little bit. So let me know if you have any kind of questions about this. I did a really quick ride because I don't want to do a 2-hour alternative comparison, but I think and I hope this helps you a little bit. See you in the next video.